Great. So yes, you don't necessarily need a counter subject, but it can make your life easier, because if you imagine every time you have the subject reappear, you basically have the counter subject material. You could potentially finagle it in a way where the counter subject material reappears as well. So that may work in your favor. It may not. It might be more difficult to execute. It may not, as by the fact that like when you invert the counter subject, the materials kind of get slightly modified. So I guess, oh, sorry, one sec. I'm gonna move my pup. Pup is here, but she still pees everywhere, so I've got to move her. One sec. I'll be right back. Sorry, guys. Just process this picture right here. I'll be right back. Hey. All right, sorry for the delay. Yeah, so I guess we haven't talked about 3D voice counterpoint yet. There's a lot of things that I could say about that. But let's see, I'm trying to remember an example of a fugue that doesn't have a counter subject. And I think I know one. I think it's this one right here, to go back in chapters. It's the F minor fugue. Oh, whoops, sorry, I'm in the wrong chapter. Might take a, jeez, gosh. I'm sorry, I actually have this written over here. I copied it over here somewhere. Oh my gosh, sorry guys. I guess I could just as easily find this fugue. It's fugue number 4. No. Oh gosh. Fugue. I don't know how gratifying this will be once I actually find this. But right here. Here's the F minor fugue. Right, so this material right here is just basically like third species free counterpoint when the melody actually comes back in the answer. So this is an example of how you can kind of finagle a counter subject that's in free counterpoint. Great, I think that was worth it. So this is different than other fugues, and the reason that you know that this is the case is that these kind of rhythmic relationships don't occur later on. It's just sort of it's just an instantaneous thing. This melodic contour just keeps going, and there's no real relationship between the counter subject when the third voice comes in. You can't see that, but I guess that's what I was playing. I learned this fugue a while back. Well, one of my students learned this fugue. Let's see. It's an oldie but a goodie. So you can kind of compare. This is the entrance of the third statement. And you can see how it doesn't really have any bearing. Like this material right here doesn't really have any real bearing to the material over here, right? You can see that, right? So in this particular situation, this is really like free counterpoint. Like you might say, well, there's some rhythmic kind of similarities, but the melodic contour is so different. So like, right? That's quite different than this. Right, so this is an example of how you can yield free counterpoint, and it might actually be simpler to handle, because the way you would kind of approach this particular type of writing is counterpoint. That's the beauty of it. You know, when you did that, I guess, homework, I'm forgetting my numberings here, but homework 8 and homework 7, it was, I mean, basically every single homework is just basically applying counterpoint, either 2 notes against 1 or 3 notes against 1 or 4 notes against 1, or suspensions. So ultimately, it's just yielding good counterpoint against your subject, and just sort of trying to apply the rules, maybe mainly of, I guess, I would say a lot, in this particular example, there's a lot of second species. So you basically see 2 notes against 1, 2 notes against 1, 2 notes against 1, etc., right? And then you kind of see it flipped a little bit. But it's still 2 against 1 counterpoint. I remember we talked a good deal about strategies for 2 against 1, and basically how in the 18th century, this idea of having dissonances on a downbeat isn't so bad. It's just the most important consideration is kind of alternating the consonant intervals and the dissonant intervals, right? So that's one way you can kind of approach it. So, you know, going back to our canned example, see if I can remember where I put this. I think it's in here. Tonal answer for a fugue. So, you know, I guess we have whoops. And then this is the real answer. This doesn't work, but the tonal answer works. So you can do something like that. Whoops. See if this works. I have to think about all the intervals. That doesn't work because that's a melodic tritone, or that's a tritone, basically on a strong beat. But there's octaves right here. I'm just kind of thinking out loud of my process right here. There's octaves over here, but they're not. These aren't accented octaves because these octaves occur on weak beats. And then, you know, you have a 5th, 4th, 3rd, right? I guess I can go into parallelism. Whoops, ooh, I have to click out of this region. Right? There's nothing saying that you can't use parallelism. Basically, I could treat this as a first species counterpoint. And then basically, that's kind of what I did. I was just adding some ancillary ostinato, kind of a little ostinato in there as the second, to kind of put it into second species, right? But what you can kind of see how my process for kind of coming up with the answer, or in this case, it's yet to be determined whether this is really a counter subject or this is just free counterpoint. And I guess the real test as to whether this is a real counter subject versus just free counterpoint is if it actually reappears during the statement of the third statement of the subject, right? But if I hack this together, whoops. Right? There's so many different possibilities. Right? This is quite parallel, but actually, no, there's some contrary motion right here. But if I were to actually look at the intervals right here, I would see 5th, 8th. And this also helps just to see. I would recommend you actually write in your intervals. Oh, doesn't like that. I want to put a 4 here, but there's no note head here. I know that's ugly, I'm sorry. Right? The one thing that's a little strange to me is having this 4th right here. But the way I look at this is I kind of see it as a passing motion, right? I kind of see 5, 4, 3 against the first species counterpoint in some ways. In some, I don't know, because this has a repeated melody note, I kind of feels this is okay. So you can kind of imagine this. Right? Something like that. I don't know, but this might raise a red flag and you might want to change something like that. Right? Something like that, right? Anyway, this is just sort of the thought process out loud of me coming up with a counter subject over this real answer. I don't know if this is helpful or not, but and yes, again, once again, it's yet to be determined whether or not this is actually going to be a counter subject until we actually get to the third statement. Any questions, or maybe I can look over your guys' work if you'd like on flat. Any volunteers? Don't speak all at once now. Oh, huh? Would any of you
get mine, Nicole?
Sure. Who is? Oh, you know what? This is my favorite part of class. I get to ask people to start their videos. Because I can't. Who was that? Was that Ivy who said, "Can you look at mine?"
Yeah, it was mine.
Okay, great. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at yours. Ivy Fugue.
I think everything that I did was too short, so.
Da 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 da. Okay. Okay, so what I see is a cool subject. However, you have to repeat the counter subject. Sorry, you have to repeat the answer in the other voice. You have to have voice exchange.
Okay, that's what I was, confused about. So the answer's in the other voice, but then, what is this thing called again?
Are you talking about a real answer versus a tonal answer?
No, because we had to write 3 things for our. You wanted us to write 3 things or whatever. hold on. Sorry. Oh, yeah. So it was the subject, the answer, and the counter subject. So I was having a hard time figuring out where.
Oh yeah, and I said counter subject, but really it doesn't hurt if you, I mean, you could have done free counterpoint as well in retrospect, but they're basically one and the same. It depends on how you use it. But yeah, so I mean, I think this is good, but you want to really make sure that this, since you have a very good candidate for a real answer, because remember, if you don't have the dominant note near the beginning of the melody, that means it's a really good candidate for a real answer. So in other words, when you restate the subject in this voice, it's going to feel like G major. So let's see how much this sounds like G major. You know what? So to me, this sounds like C major for a long time. I would start right in the G major key area. And instead of modulating to the G at the end, I would just be in the G the whole time. It's like the reason it just sounds like, you see how this is really kind of emphasizing the C major tonality? You only see the G sharp near the end, right? Or, I mean, sorry, the F sharp near the end.
Should I try and, should I try and change the,
sorry, it's not
subject?
No, I'm sorry, I'm misleading you. The subject is fine. It's okay that this F sharp is near the end, if I were to correct myself. The issue, I think, is the counterpoint that's created against the subject. Okay. That's sort of, because you're like, because that does sound like G major. So I was wrong to say that there's lots of C's. I think you're treating these C's as part of C major. I think that's the problem. Like in the counterpoint, you're doing, right? You're treating the C with like octave doubling of the C, which is giving you the impression that you're in C major still. So like, you know, you can do something where you have more of you emphasize more of the G tonality. So like the counter subject, or the free counterpoint in the other voice can have lots of, you know what I mean? Whatever, I mean, I'm butchering your subject a little bit, but it's basically, so I guess the first thing is just, I would probably just get rid of this. I would probably start over on the counterpoint aspect of it.
Okay.
And just copy this down to the bottom voice. And I guess another important consideration is this. I think there's this idea that I didn't talk about, which is the link. And the link, I segmented this by putting the link kind of in the answer. Sometimes a link appears where a proper motive ends. So its purpose is to keep the rhythm flowing smoothly from the first note of the material that follows. So I think you might be a good candidate for including a link. So for instance, in this example, right, before the second motive appears, right, the idea is that this little link right here keeps it flowing smoothly. But what I'm worried about right here, since there's a stop, it just seems like it'll be kind of abrupt.
Okay.
So you could somehow, I guess you have to start, okay, there's a little bit of a problem here. Oh no, actually no, there's not a problem. You're a perfect candidate for a link.
Could I maybe start the counterpoint on like or not the counterpoint, sorry, the answer on the and of one? Is that a thing? So it's not like starting at the same time.
I think that would be kind of difficult because the feeling of this makes most sense, I think, on a downbeat and probably beat one. So do you mind if I move some stuff around?
Sure.
Okay. I'm gonna delete some stuff. I hope you don't feel sorrow, but I guess you can undo.
No, I don't.
Okay, so maybe you can go da da. Okay, so I think what you should do, instead is just to make your life easier, is do something like this. Because then you're kind of setting yourself up so that you're actually in G major in this other key. Right? And then you basically copy this over here, but then you transpose it all. And then that's where you include the free counterpoint.
Okay.
Yeah, cool.
And then how long are we supposed to, how long is our fugue supposed to be?
Your fugue just needs to have the appropriate components. It has to have,
Okay.
you know, as Mark Twain said, how long is a good piece of writing? It's as long as a piece of string.
Okay, and what are the components that we need for sure? Sorry, I just want to make sure that I'm
Sure. No, absolutely. There's basically you have to do the exposition.
Oh, I see. So it's this whole thing on the
Yeah.
the one note talk. Okay, cool.
Yeah, and I think, like, you know, I would also, if you can, do the episode. You know, we haven't even talked about that. I guess the original expectation for Thompson is to also include this aspect. Dutton, I don't think it's necessary that you include this aspect, but it's all here, and you've done basically most of it. And then when you have it in the third voice, there's just more considerations in terms of just fleshing out the notes of the chord.
Okay.
Sure.
Cool, thank you.
Of course. Can I see someone else's work? Chris, do you mind if I check out yours, because you asked a question about it in email?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. All right. Chris. 4/5B fugue. Okay, so this is the same sort of advice I gave to Ivy. When you have this, it still seems like you're in C major, by virtue of the fact that you didn't kind of end the subject in a way that sort of leads into the dominant. So it feels like, in some ways, even though this is a real answer, this feels like a tonal answer, because you're starting with the C major tonality right away. So, like, something like that. Let's take a look at what Bach does. I'm going to check out the answer section. I'm going to check out the real answer. Right, he sets it up so that you can at least get to a third of the new key area, right? Because we're in the key of D major now. But he sets it up so that you're not emphasizing the one key area somehow. So, like, there's many ways you can finagle it. Right? So, like, right? So fa mi re do ti. Right? So, like, you can just basically, sorry, I'll move this up. You can always move this back. And now you've clearly established the dominant key area. Right? And then, so yeah, that's one thing you can do. And I think your email was pertaining to the counter subject, so that's why I added what I did. There's actually quite a a lack of information in the books I've been checking out. I mean, I guess the information is all contained in the examples. That's really the thing, the nature of it. But there was literally like one paragraph about the counter subject, and I paraphrased it pretty much to the entire depth that it existed, and it didn't include an example at all. So I guess a good example is just by looking through the fugues. There was this really good website, and I emailed the developer of it. There's this interactive well-tempered clavier website, which basically had every single fugue in like Shockwave or Flash or something, and it would basically show you every single section of the fugue in like an interactive manner while it was happening, which was really cool. But I guess, and so I emailed the creator of that, the professor at like Northern Arizona University, to see if he can put it back up. But in the interim, I guess one good strategy, I mean, this has been so fun for me because I can't emphasize how much I've learned just by analyzing and reading through the example, like literally looking through every example in the OneNote and playing it on the piano, or like doing an analysis and being like, what happens here? What note choices are here? It really helps. And there's such a wealth of information out there. So like, for instance, if I look up a fugue, Bach fugue, I don't know, Bach fugue F minor, with analysis. Oh, you know what? Okay, for instance, we haven't talked about a triple fugue yet, but I have a student. So fugues are important to pianists. Like my undergrad was in classical piano, and every single piano major had to play a fugue before they got into school. Like that was like my audition. I had to play a fugue, and I had no idea what I was doing. And so after I went to music school, I actually started understanding what I was doing. So it's like very common. It's like a very fun and rewarding thing to play. And I would just recommend and it's also very difficult just to struggle through it. But look at this. I actually found they've actually converted it to YouTube. So exposition. Subject, first counter subject, you see that? Hey, this is the one Griffin was talking about, I think. Griffin, this is the one that you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Wait, what?
I think this is the one that you were listening to that was very chromatic.
Yeah. I think, yeah.
So check this out. Look at how beautiful this is. Isn't this amazing? There's nothing more rewarding and frustrating to play than a fugue. So I encourage you all to have some fun and play a fugue, and analyze a fugue. So I remember when I had to learn a fugue, the first fugue I ever learned was like the hardest thing I ever had to do in my life. But looking at the analysis actually helped to some degree because I was like, because you have to bring out every single voice of each subject. You have to bring out the subject in each voice. So doing an analysis really helps if you're ever playing this type of music. So this is exactly what I was talking about that used to exist on Flash, but now it exists on YouTube. So I guess the creator of that channel will probably email me back and say, hey, we put it all on YouTube. So I'm going to put this I'm going to put this playlist on the OneNote so you can analyze, so you can look through this. It's pretty awesome, right? So let's see. I'll put this under, this is the YouTube playlist. And then I'll do, actually, you know what? I'm just gonna create a new heading. Add section, fugue playlist. Okay. Rename fugue. Such a cool website. Just enjoy it. Okay. So getting back to Chris's inquiry, I guess let's see, where's this thing? Okay. So I guess, Chris, you have multiple options here. You could just totally do free counterpoint, or you could do a counter subject. It's totally up to you. It just kind of do what you feel. And you might find, I think in 3 voice textures, counter subjects are easier to finagle because you don't have to worry about the other voices as much. So I think in some ways, when you have 5 voices or 4 voices, you know, for instance, that F minor fugue in F minor that didn't have a counter subject, maybe the reason it didn't have it is because it was more difficult to negotiate once you had 4 or more voices, right? But with 3 voices, maybe it's more tractable to have a counter subject. So I guess my advice to you is just write. See if you just come up with something that sounds good against this, and then hopefully it'll invert when you flip it for the 3rd entrance, and then your work will have paid its dividends. So you get double the amount of double the fugal result for half the work, if that is the case, exempting some sort of note changes you have to do to kind of make the invertible counterpoint work. And just one other kind of refresher on invertible counterpoint, which is that, look at this invention right here. The 5th shouldn't be careful about fifths, because when you invert the counterpoint and the top voice becomes the bottom voice and the bottom voice becomes the top voice, you'll run into some issues where you'll have fourths on downbeats. So that's why in this example of the Bach invention, whoops, I'm going to butcher this, I'm sorry. Right, and then when it appears over here, right, he changes the interval, because what would have normally happened right here is you would have actually had a 4th, but what you actually have is a 6th, right? Because what would have happened here is you would have had, but he changes it to a 6th. So keep that in mind. Downbeats generally don't want to have dissonances like fourths, if you can avoid them. Even when you have that alternating consonant dissonant sort of paradigm of this. You know, over here you see an example of 4th on a downbeat, but the reason that this is okay is I think the dissonance is resolving down by step, or it's resolving by step, right? In this particular case, where you have this, I'm sorry, if you have this, you see, if this were a 4th, you'd basically be emphasizing the 4th one more time by moving it up an octave, right? So the principle of your original counterpoint from the 16th century kind of stands. Try to avoid dissonances on downbeats, and if you have a dissonance, I guess one allowance is that if you do have a dissonance on a downbeat, try to resolve it in a stepwise manner. Okay, so that's one kind of consideration you'll have to run in against when you're doing invertible counterpoint. But yeah, have fun with it.
Sweet, thank you.
Of course. Let's see. Wonder who else I can kind of check on, or I can start talking about, I guess, the next sort of thing, which is the bridge. You know, if you remember, I guess if we're going to the overarching concept of a fugue, which you can always refer to right here. We wrote this up last class. This is the episode. Sorry, this is the exposition. And, you know, you have the statement of the subject, announcement of the subject in the first voice, and I should add something. 1 key area, right? Statement of subject in second voice, and this is in the 5 key area, right? Or 1 to 5 key area. Right. I guess I should let me actually make this a little clearer by doing this. Right. So no matter what, your announcement of the subject will be in the 1 key area, the tonic key area. Right. If you have a real answer, the answer will begin in the dominant key area right away. If you have a tonal answer, it'll begin in the tonic area, but by the end of the statement, it's in the dominant area. Okay. However, the bridge, ultimately the statement of the subject in the third voice will be in the 1 key area. So that raises a question, how do you get back? Well, let's look at Bach to see what he does. Sorry, all these fugues have so many different applications, so I'm like, where did I put this fugue? Okay, here it is. This is the one that I basically had as a template for your homework, right? I think this is the first fugue I ever learned. Right, this is a tonal answer, right? Because of the C. If this was a real answer, you'd have, but so you're still in the 1 key area. Now you're in the 5 key area, right? You are now in the 5 key area, right? Because you have a G minor chord. But ultimately, when you get back to the first statement of the subject, sorry, I'm not speaking very clearly right now. Once you get to the statement, once you get to the third statement of the subject, you're back in the 1 key area. Right? So how do you do that? How do you get from the 5 key area back to the 1 key area? Let's backtrack. Let's analyze this, because the answer is there's really no hard and fast rule. So let's see. So what we have is a C minor. What do we have here? We have, sorry, one note's going to be a little obnoxious right here. Doesn't allow me to have, well, I guess I can do this. You have an F minor. Blah, blah, blah. So you have a G minor. I guess let's backtrack. You start with the G minor chord right here. First of all, I guess I'm gonna circle the spots which I think are where I'm deriving the harmony. Da da da. Da. Da, da. And I guess I know this because I've played this before. Right? So these are the different chords that occur during this passage. So you have a G minor, then you actually have a C minor, right? And then you have an F minor. And you have a D minor, and then you have a G minor, and then you have an E flat major, and then you have A flat major. So what you really have is you have basically I'm kind of rusty on my sequence definitions, but basically you're descending a third, you're ascending a fourth. You're descending a third, you're ascending a fourth, right? You have the classic sequence. Right? So Bach does this bridge, and it's basically based on the beginning of the subject and the counter subject in contrary motion. So you kind of hear a little bit of this, right? Okay. So this is like the harmonic trajectory of what he does right here. This isn't quite a falling fifth sequence. Not quite a falling fifth sequence, but it has certain elements that do fall fifths, like this G to C to F falls fifths, right? Descending fifth sequence. And then this is a descending fifth, and then this is a descending fifth. You don't have to have a bridge this long. You know, in fact, Thompson considers this one of the longest bridges. A lot of times you can just have kind of you can come back to the key area pretty quickly. So let's kind of imagine what we could do. Right? You could somehow do something like that, right? Where you have basically whoops. Sorry, there's a lot of unnecessary chromaticism in that, but that's a way to shorten the bridge. You don't have to necessarily do a sequence for a bridge, but Bach does one right here in order to get back from the five tonality. Maybe that's worth discussing. How are we doing on time? So ultimately you have to get from a G minor to a C major, right? Sorry, a C minor. That's the challenge. Harmonically, that's a challenge. And you're also given this expectation to kind of use some of these melodic features, right? Da 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 da. Right. So that's the challenge. You want to somehow reuse some aspect of the subject or the counter subject in the bridge in order to get you back to the one key area. And that's the challenge. And I don't have a really quick, hard and fast answer to this. I have lots of examples of this, but that's the basic tenet that you're trying to accomplish. I know we're sort of looking ahead here towards this third statement of the subject, but ultimately you're going to have to employ either a sequence or some sort of melody that has some sort of reference to the subject or counter subject in order to bring you back to that one key area. And that's really the essence of the bridge. And we'll look at some sequencing activities, but they're not necessarily that salient for the bridge. They're more salient for the episodic passages, because those are really common in the episodes. I mean, they basically define the episodes, these sort of descending, ascending fifth sequences, which you kind of see in many places throughout Bach's music. Anyway, does anyone have any questions about any of this? I know that's a lot of information, but start thinking in this regard. Think about how you can actually get back to the one key area in case you've already finished the first two components, the first statement and the second statement, and either the counter subject or the accompanying counterpoint to the second statement. So, man. All right, let's take a look at the chat. Invertible in this case just means that you can put it in the bottom voice. Yes, there's a distinction between invertible counterpoint and melodic inversion. Melodic inversion is when you play this melody and you invert all the intervals of the melodic contour. That's melodic inversion. It's a confusing distinction. The nomenclature is what it is. Invertible counterpoint means that you exchange the voices. So the top voice is on the bottom and the bottom voice is on the top. And the idea of inversion comes from the fact that the intervals themselves are kind of inverted. So that's why, like in this example, if you have a fifth and you switch this so that this is on bottom and this is on top, the fifth becomes a fourth. Cool. Any other questions? I guess I'll start combing through your flat.io documents. But yeah, just look through. What I would suggest is just do as much analysis as you can. Look through these, play through them, watch on YouTube. It's a great way to learn. And just experiment. It's really the only way you can do it. There are other types of things. I'll space this out throughout the class, but there are so many different considerations. For instance, they actually have a statistical outline of how many times Bach used this kind of entry versus this kind of entry versus this kind of entry. Meaning, like 1, 2, 3 means that the statement of the subject first happened in the first voice, then it happened in the middle voice, then it happened in the bottom voice. And Bach did this the most amount of times. Bach did it so that statement of the subject was in the middle voice, and then the top voice, and then the bottom voice this many times. He rarely did these other configurations, and he never did this configuration, where the subject was first in the middle voice, and then the bottom voice, and then the top voice. So, I mean, you only glean these kind of pieces of information just by doing analysis or by reading about other people's analyses. And there's so many types of fugues. For instance, Griffin had, we can talk about this next class, but it doesn't have much information, really. The textbook doesn't have a great deal of information on this type of fugue, the stretto fugue, except to tell you that it really exists. And the stretto fugue is really the idea that it's basically a canon. The subject of the second voice comes in before the subject is fully stated in the first voice. But it doesn't, literally there's a little paragraph on that, and then it shows the music. So the assumption is go through and study the music to really understand what's going on. But that's something we can do as a class, and I also put in the audio so you can listen to it. Anyway, sorry, I can go on and on about this, but if you don't have any questions, then I'll just shut up and sit here. I know I'm going to talk to Griffin after class anyway, but.
Hey, Nakul, if you have a chance, can you look at mine?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Great.
I have the first 3 parts written.
Okay, cool.
And then I'm thinking from there, I want to go into like a developmental section and then just do a recap.
Okay, Kelly.
But I want to make sure that's correct.
The development, yeah, kind of like the bridge, you mean, like between the. Oh, I see. Okay. Da 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 da. I think there's something about this that Okay, so I would watch out here because you basically have a second here, but then you're leaping from a dissonance.
Oh, okay.
And then, so, this is not as standard, but you can get away with it from the standpoint that you have a second right here. But it's something about that just, I don't know, it sounds a little strange to me. I would, even though this is technically allowable, I think in the context, maybe, the idea, I think the fact that you're kind of emphasizing this, it's almost like you're repeating this note, but you're kind of doing this. I don't know, maybe change this, consider changing this note. You don't have to, but possibility to something more consonant.
Okay.
Okay, so one thing I should say, so the problem I'm having with this is it doesn't seem to really outline the, this is an F major, and then it's going to go to C major. It doesn't feel as C major like as it could to my ears. It still seems like it's an F major. At the beginning, that's okay. But you know, you have a lot of B flats.
Entrance of the third voice?
No, I'm talking about this the statement in the second voice.
So we want that to go to C major is what you're saying?
Yeah, we want that to go to C major because it needs, so in a tonal answer, you don't start in the dominant key area, but you pretty quickly go to the dominant area. So actually, I think I know the problem. Okay, so in a real answer, you would go, the problem is you changed, okay, so the issue you have is you changed all the other notes. The only note, so what you want to do to make a tonal answer is you literally copy and paste. You have the real answer, but the only thing you change is you change the fifths to fourths near the beginning. So for instance, like, I'll just change one of these notes around. What I'm getting at is that it should be this. Like, because the rest of it should actually be exactly a fifth above. It's just the beginning that you want to change. So now it seems like you're in C major, right? But if that makes sense, right? So ultimately, I'm going to copy and paste something, and then I'm going to go back and undo. Okay.
Okay.
Whoops. Sounds like an airplane. So the idea is you just change that G to an F. You just change all G's to an F near the beginning, but then you leave the rest of it the same. Because basically, the idea behind a tonal answer, it's a very subtle distinction, is that you want to avoid having, so here you see an F major. This is actually this great example because it's in exactly the same key. You see the C, its function is the 5 of F major, right? If you were to transpose this up a fifth, it would be G. And that would feel like a 5 of 5. It would basically feel like you're emphasizing the dominant of the dominant, right? If that makes sense?
Yeah.
So, but notice how every other aspect of the melody is actually exactly transposed up a fifth. Like this is exactly up a fifth. This is exactly up a fifth. This is exactly up a fifth, right? All the rest of the subject restatement is exactly up a fifth, right? Only that first note is changed.
Oh, okay. I get it.
Yeah, so then that's why it wasn't, I was like, why is this not sounding like C major? And it's because you transposed everything else. You only transposed the first bit. So I guess we undo, and then, is this the way it was? I guess that's the way it was, right?
Yeah, it was.
Or no, I'm sorry. No. Wait, was it? Oh, what? Okay, yeah, I changed some of these notes. Anyway, but that's the idea.
Okay, that makes more sense now.
Cool. And then I guess the next part. So, and also, I want to warn you, just make sure you have consistent, like, make sure you mirror the rhythm and notes of the completely in its entirety, right? Not just the beginning. Like over here, it seems like you're losing. I might have accidentally deleted that or something, but it's breaking imitation. If you see what I mean.
Yeah, I think you deleted it, but
Oh, okay.
yeah, I'll make sure for that.
Okay, cool. Oh yeah, okay, great. And then I guess, and then you did a bridge. But here's the thing. You don't actually go into 3-voice counterpoint yet. You only go into 3-voice. Oh, I see. This is the 3rd voice. This is the 3-voice counterpoint right here.
Yes.
But so what needs to precede this is that, so here's the thing. It needs to be back in the 1 key area. So I think you're gonna have to rewrite this bridge. Because you're gonna have the subject appear like it appears right here. And what you have is the subject appearing in the not quite tonal answer version. So it's actually gonna appear literally as it appears over here.
So basically just copy and paste that into the 3rd voice?
Yes. And then also, yes, exactly. And then there are strategies for 3-voice counterpoint, which I haven't talked about. Like there's so many, basically it's anything goes, and all the book tells you is all the different possibilities. And so that's what I tried to show you. But there's certain intervals that are allowable or usable. And I guess if you're trying to convey a chord, you have to obviously omit certain notes so that, the 5th is the most common note to omit, but you don't want to omit the 3rd and the 5th because then you lose the sense of the chord. Doubling the 7th. So there's certain considerations, but prior to this, I would also, include the bridge, that bridge I was talking about at the end of class, which basically, so what you have to do is you have to get back from the 5 key area back to the 1 key area. And that's what the bridge accomplishes. And that's basically what I was mentioning here. This is the bridge. We were doing this analysis. It's a very complicated way to get back to the 1 key area. But you could do something much simpler. That's what I was trying to start doing, but didn't finish. And that's the only way. Otherwise, and incidentally, the bridge only has 2 voices, right? Because you're ushering in the 3rd voice. So you don't want to introduce the 3rd voice during the bridge. You only introduce the 3rd voice when the 3rd voice states the subject.
Okay, so go to the bridge and then add the 3rd voice.
Exactly. And by going, yeah, exactly, precisely. So that's what would happen in between this and this. But yeah, I'm glad you chose a tonal answer because it's cool. It's a very subtle difference, but all the composers seem to be all about it. They just didn't want to go to the supertonic or the 5 of 5 too soon. So, but then again, Bach breaks the rules sometimes. I think I have an example somewhere, but maybe not. Yeah, hopefully that helps.
It
Cool. Yeah, it's looking good, and yeah, just keep up the good work, and I'll just keep checking this. I'll check this over the next couple of days, and we have some time, so it's all good.
Sweet. Thank you.
Of course. All right, Ozan, do you have a question?
No, I'll let Griffin go first.
Oh, I think, well, Griffin might want to talk. Griffin might want to talk for an extended period of time. He emailed me ahead of time, so.
Yeah, okay, never mind then.
Oh, well, either way, if you want to say, yeah, we can talk. We can schedule another meeting or something if you'd like.
Yeah, it's fine.
Cool. Griffin, what's up, man? Let's check out your fugue. Did you decide to stay with the Stretto fugue?
Well, I mean, I kept I don't know. It's just hard to write something in the 5 that's like convincing, and in minor I didn't know if we could use the minor 5 or what. So
Okay. Yes, you're expected to use the minor 5.
oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's not supposed to be. That's a really good thing that I should have brought up. Yeah, because like for instance, in this classic fugue, I always bring this one up because I'm familiar with it. But we're clearly in G minor.
Yeah.
So whoops, let me just play it.
Yeah, so that's all, like, these are just all things I wrote, but
Okay, so let's take a look at this. So what I see here is interesting. Now, here's the thing, though. Since you have the dominant so early on in the subject, you'd probably have to change this fifth to a fourth in order to kind of be in the one key area still. So like you have, right, instead of, but then here's the thing, you don't actually, I see what you're doing. You actually change this to the major 5 instead of the minor 5.
yeah.
So what's interesting is, since this is descending, there's an example of this, because otherwise you'd have, or something like that. If you were to change, for instance, if you were to change this fifth to a fourth, there is an example of this in the Bach, and what I'm getting at is sometimes your instance, I think you'd have to change more than just the dominant note. Because in this example, it starts very similar to yours. It starts on the dominant note. It doesn't, well, yours doesn't start on the dominant note, but it very quickly emphasizes the dominant note. Whoops, I'm sorry. And then it shows you what the real answer would have been. And then if it were a real answer, it'd be, but then what it does is actually changes a lot of the notes. If you see what I mean, it's like, so I guess the first thing I would say is, because you have the dominant so close to the beginning, I think you have to use a real answer. You have to use a tonal answer. Unfortunately. But yeah, and obviously you have to change this G sharp to a G, and I'm trying to think of how you would do that. I think just looking back to what you see right here, so what they do have in common is this, right? So maybe you could somehow work backwards, but here you're clearly in the 5 key area, because ultimately you have to get to the 5 key area. But you start out in the 1 key area, whereas here you start in the 5 key area. Oh, I see. Okay. Da, Yeah, so all you'd have to do is basically copy this at the end and somehow work through. Right? So it's not that hard. You just have to change some more of the notes if you were to have a true tonal answer. So I'll change it around, but you can undo it.
Yeah, sure.
Da, 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 yeah, and then da 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 da. That would all change it, stay the same. Something like that, right? And then, so that way you start with the one key area, but then you by the end of it, you feel really locked into the 5 key area.
So even though the subject starts on A and then the answer starts on E, it's still not. It's still fine to like do that.
Exactly. So this is a classic case because you don't always start with the 1. So I'll show you here, for instance, this Bach. It starts on the 1 and it goes to the dominant on the 4th note. Even though it goes to the dominant on the 4th note, it's still close enough to the beginning of the subject that Bach needs to do a tonal answer. And which is interesting. So I think if that's what you were asking.
Yeah. And then also could, if you scroll down, I think it's like the 19th bar or something like that, or actually, yeah, the G minor in the 15th bar.
G minor in the 15th bar.
Yeah, if you could hear that and tell me what's up with that, because I still keep the E flat, but I have an F sharp. But at the end, it ends in the 5 key. So I would want to know if that could work too.
Okay. So this is the sketch you're talking about. Let's see.
Yeah.
Yeah, this looks already good because.
Well, the thing is.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, it's there are 2 flats in the key. So.
Oh, I see.
I was doing this thing.
Well, I wouldn't. Okay, I think this is by doing the E flat here, you're making it feel as though you're still in G minor.
Yeah.
So I would just do E natural. And
yeah, what I could do is I could just change the whole thing instead of being in minor to in major. So.
Yeah, you could do that. But then I guess this would have to change. Yeah, and I would, if this were kept in minor. That's descending melodic minor. Or no, that's actually, that's ascending melodic minor but played in a descending manner. It works though, it kind of gets you to that 5 key area. So this one works. Yeah, this is all good stuff. I like this one too. This one is good too. I mean, I guess if you were to stick with the Stratofugue idea, I guess we can listen to a beginning of how Bach does it. Whoops, let me just go to actual YouTube.
If you've looked at a piano keyboard in the past and you've been intimidated, I'm going to fix that for you.
just a prelude. Interesting, right? Oh yeah. Sorry, I was looking at this and I was like, hey, wow, yours looks just like that one. But then I realized I was looking at that one. Huh.
So is that fourth bad there?
No, the fifth is fine. I'm just thinking, whenever I see a tie, I always think of suspensions. And oh yeah, so I guess this is wrong because you have to be in the 5 key area. That's one of the reasons that this is wrong. Or you have to do some sort of tonal. I guess you'd have to do a tonal answer. But this is just a direct imitation. Because you're in the 1 key area and then you're still in the 1 key area.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, it's fine, but you have to change. You basically have to do that thing where you basically, right?
Yeah.
Let's see if Bach actually does that. Oh, wrong one. Da, da, da. Yeah. And then this goes up a 5th, so it's really small. Oh, wait. There it is. It basically, in Bach's Stretto fugue, da, 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 da. But notice how it's a tonal answer, because otherwise it would be, this would be, but instead it goes, it's all about changing that 5th to a 4th.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I guess that's one thing about it. The other thing, I mean, I'm still trying to figure out exactly how these suspensions and ties are related in free counterpoint. It's just, but I guess that's not as important now because that you'd have to change that stuff anyway. Where did your thing go? Griffin, there it is, okay. Yeah, I guess like this, it's like, I think what's objectionable about this is that it's a leap to a dissonance. I think that's what makes me not like it as much. Especially that early on. But I guess you'd have to change a lot of stuff here to make this work anyway because of the.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you've got some winners right here. And this one's a winner too. It's just going to require more work.
Yeah, it's just hard to write it in the style because it's easier for me to write something. Like it's easier to write a canon or something where the interval of imitation is like, you know, just it's, you know, at a unison, I guess, than to write something in the 5 that like sounds convincing and it like goes there. It's just weird for me, I guess. I don't know.
Oh, to do something, yeah, to imitate it the 5th instead of just a canon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a different thing altogether for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Inventions, I guess that's what demarcates a two-part invention from a three-part invention or a fugue.
Yeah. And also with this one that's on the screen right now, it's basically just all the chords are just 1 and 5. So
Right.
is that fine, or does there have to be like a 2 in there? For it, does the subject have to be a phrase or not?
Well, I could argue that there are other chords that are here. For instance, it kind of feels like. So I think this is definitely interesting enough. But I think if you were to analyze this, you could put a 2 chord here, for instance, or 2/6.
Yeah,
because this is definitely sounds like something Bach would write. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, that's totally fine. Yeah, I guess you know all the fancy jazz reharms too, so put those in too. Yeah. I guess some of this stuff needs to be changed. Well, I guess we already did kind of change it, but I guess it would be minor. Yeah. Yeah, I guess simple chords are fine, and the extent to which you need to include them is kind of to be determined, I guess, because yeah, I'll have to ask Dutton if he. Well, I think it's good practice to put in chords just to help you understand what you're doing, to see if it makes sense, to see if the progressions that you're adding are actually salient. But yeah, it's looking good, Griffin. I like it. I think you have a good Baroque sensibility. I think you've had it since the beginning of class, as I felt in your motet.
Yeah.
So it's cool. Do you like listening to Bach in general?
Yeah. Well, the B flat minor fugue and the F minor fugue